All right, so the big elephant in the room, the big issue in boxing, the subject that everyone that's involved wants to talk about, but it's probably not even sure that they can talk about, if I'm being quite frank, is the utter hypocrisy in Anthony Joshua's latest tweet. I want to be crystal clear here. It isn't that he said support black businesses. I agree with that sentiment, or at the very least with his right to voice his sentiment publicly. And I, on a personal note, try and keep my money in house. I try and support local businesses when I can. But there is a massive amount of hypocrisy in this tweet. Okay, and left alone, it would probably not be anything. But there's a pattern, and I want you to stick around, and I want to be able to point out the pattern, but we'll start with the tweet first. I'll read the tweet out and we'll go over some of the inconsistencies. Okay. If you think I'm a racist, go fuck yourself. If you watch the full video, the speech was passed around for someone to read and I took the lead. I personally spoke from the heart about the Watford community, ideas of us personally investing 7 figures to create unity and opportunities and adding change to the African Caribbean community. Shops aren't the issue here. Before you talk shit, you better boycott racism. I said what I said, and I will act to make change. Which, again, I want to make this perfectly clear. And I'll probably have to do this over and over and over again over the course of this video. It does not matter to me in the slightest bit whether you agree with the sentiment of the statement he was reading, a statement he felt to make clear that he did not write. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper, later in the video. Or you don't agree with it. It doesn't matter. I only care to point out the double standards, and in Anthony Joshua's case, a bit of a track record with regards to these things. Now, normally one instance, like I said, of public hypocrisy isn't enough, at least in my mind, to do a whole video for several reasons. One, who the hell am I to look down at my nose at anybody, right? And it's a long look down, as you can see. In high school, they used to say I had a elbow attached to my face. These were vicious people, and these were ruthless times. But nonetheless, who am I to look down my nose at anybody? Okay, and two, we're all hypocrites. Nobody has a perfect track record, and people say dumb shit all the time. But when you try and pick up the lowest of hanging fruit in terms of scoring social justice points, considering the climate, considering the economical climate, considering the political climate, considering how high tensions are, and then you immediately back off of your square when you realize that you might stand to lose something, and I'm talking about finances, I take exception with that. You add in the fact that a significant portion of actual fans, the people who keep boxing running, keep the show going on, were outraged. And instead of saying, hey man, that was a shitty take, we're strawmanning people's arguments on Twitter and hurling FUs to justify your inability to hold firm on an issue. I take exception with that. I'm sure the shop owner that you offended, who voiced his opinion on Twitter, woke up that morning hoping and praying. I hope Anthony Joshua, please Lord, I hope Anthony Joshua slips up so I can dog him out on Twitter. This is a direct quote from nobody. From fucking nobody, because nobody's ever said that in the history of the world. I just made that up. I'll give you that maybe one guy woke up somewhere in the UK with the plan to troll Anthony Joshua all day. But with the exception of that one guy, which by the way, I'd like to speak to him. With this hypothetical guy that I'm describing, assuming he's in America, he probably is waking up hoping and praying. But it's not the hoping and praying that you think I'm talking about. He's probably hoping and praying that his PPP loan has got approved and that the money's there. Because I think we've still yet to pay out like a large chunk of the money that was allocated for that in this country. I don't know what the situation is like in the UK from an economic standpoint, but I would imagine, if I'm a betting man, okay, and you're in the first world, I would imagine that your situation is fucked, just like ours. Right? But again, this is one instance of hypocrisy. We need to go back and find out if it is more than one instance. And I don't think I'd be here making this video if it wasn't. So here we are. Now, before I get into the reason for even making the video, right? I just want to add this as a caveat. Also, I'm not interested in hypocritical stances that Anthony Joshua has taken as it relates to boxing and boxing negotiations, because we know and understand that this is a math problem, right? And especially when people are negotiating by way of social media, right? That hypocrisy exists on all sides, in every camp, on every platform, right? If you're doing your job correctly and you're going into negotiations for a fighter, you are certainly overvaluing your fighter, and the guy on the other side is doing the same thing, right? So at some point, somebody's going to have to give, and there's certainly dishonesty on both sides. But what I'm specifically talking about with regards to Anthony Joshua is his tendency to back off of any issue that isn't as simple as black and white. I'm using the term figuratively, but on some level, the use is literal. If you add any nuance to the situation, anything that might contradict his actions elsewhere, anything that might affect the bag. And listen, if you've made it clear that securing the bag and protecting your bag is your number one priorities, then by all means carry on. If that is a number one for you. But we can't have our cake and eat it too. Can we? Joshua himself has made it clear that he would like to be a politician once his boxing career is up. Here are some of the policies, or here's a policy that he would put into place if he were in power. I want to play you this clip.
To say him, well spoken, ever considered a career in politics afterwards?
Yeah, 100%.
To make a real difference? 100%, really?
Yeah, I've got a few things to say. Let's say we don't have much resources here, so a lot of the financial, well, let's say like a lot of countries are colonized, so they make a lot of money that way as well. But if you look at the country, there's taxes to be paid. So I think people that are paying high taxes should at least have, like let's say everyone pays taxes and they come to you and they said, you earn this, you pay tax this, where would you like 10% of your tax money to go? And I would choose a charity of myself, for instance, then people wouldn't be so inclined to leave and take their money elsewhere because they'll have an involvement of where their tax money is going. So I think that's what I'll probably have more of an interest in doing.
Okay. First of all, tax cuts to the wealthy. It doesn't make you a regular Che Guevara. You understand what I'm saying? I would imagine that you'd be hard pressed to find somebody in the crowd that you were reading the speech, of course, that you did not write. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody that believes, from a policy standpoint, that giving rich people tax cuts is in other words, is the policy that they want to run with. And as a matter of fact, it's the opposite usually with liberal types. So that's one, right? And then the other side, I mean, it's a major, I don't know about in the UK, but in America, tax cuts for the wealthy is a major Republican talking point. Okay. But this is another little, instance to add it, right? And this is what rich people do anyway. And in our country, at the very least, is if the taxes are too high, they will find a place, a tax haven, in order to invest their money. Saudi Arabia, anyone? More on that later. But when you take into account Anthony Joshua's eagerness to immediately back off on human rights issues in China, when you consider an estimated 1 million, roughly 10% of China's Uyghur population, are currently sitting in internment camps, right? And I want to stress this. I don't want to just gloss over this, right? For those who might not know, there's a ton of political unrest in China as a result of the Orwellian policies put in place by the CCP. One of the most egregious acts committed by the CCP has been the treatment and internment of these Uyghur people. These Uyghur people are at the very least, from a religious standpoint, they are Muslim people, and they believe in Islam. These people are being interned. These people are being held against their own will in internment camps. They're being watched over, and they're being placed in these internment camps until they no longer believe whatever it is that they believe. And if you are a Muslim person or you follow Islam, that would be tantamount to, I mean, this is an impossible task. You know, most people would probably choose death over that, as crazy as that sounds. Moving on. This is what he had to say on the issue of some of the backlash of the CCP. Let's take a look at this. Let's listen to this.
And China didn't show it. It's a hard one because Ozil's trying to. I don't think he's disrespecting China. It's hard because you want to make awareness of these things, and you're in a platform to be a spokesman as well. But that's why certain athletes are just boring, because sometimes it's just best to just do what you do. But maybe the same again. He should have spoken to someone from that country, involved someone in his conversation and said, how do you feel about this situation that's going on in China? Then they would say, look, this is the situation that's going on, rather than it just being from my point of view. And that goes back to the campaign that they're making. Inclusion is more important than just me spreading it from my point of view.
Let's just say that he's completely not in the loop on the subject, right? He will almost always resort to feigning innocence and acting as if he's completely aware of the situation, right? But then we go deeper. We dig deeper into the Saudi Arabia quote. We go ahead and check this out.
It was interesting because when I took the fight, I started hearing more about these things. So I've never been like heavily into like politics or heavily into the history of Saudi Arabia to a certain degree. But when I chose to fight there, I started learning more about it. And I think you have to get in Saudi Arabia involved to make a change and put a positive light. So I think that previously the country was one way. And honestly, I think that the Crown Prince is making efforts to make a big change. And then when I spoke to them, they said, I know your boxing match was important, but the most important thing for us was what he'd done for Saudi Arabia. So interesting, I think we have to respect their culture as well. I understand that. So that's their culture. And I think I respect that. So that's just the way of their life, and I respect that. But in terms of the way they treat people and stuff, I think it was positive. It was a nice.
So I mean, Joshua, I'll get to I'll get to this in rule number 3, but he just did some of it. When he's kind of in a corner, he will word salad his way out of some shit sometimes. But if you follow what it was that he was saying, he was essentially saying, hey, look, guys, it's bad. I did some research. First of all, again, I signed the fight before I even knew. But then after the fact, I did some reading, I did some research, and yeah, things are crappy. But, not that bad. And nonetheless, the prince was happy that I brought some shine to his country. I mean, this would not be an acceptable answer, considering the protests that are going on right now. If Joshua took the stage and got into the middle of that crowd and turned around and said, hey, listen, things aren't... How do you think that plays out? Right? So now, for context, right? Because Joshua himself said, he did start looking over some of the things, right? So for context, let's look up some of the human rights facts about Saudi Arabia. Some of these changes that he's saying, so that we can understand context, so that we can form an opinion as to whether or not the question was even fair to begin with from the reporter. All right, so I'm going to run down these real quick. I mean, it's coming from amnesty.org.uk. This is an organization that's been critical of Joshua in the past with regards to his agreeing to take the fight in Saudi. They've came up with a quick list, 10 different bullet points, so we'll run down them real quick. Number 1, torture is used as a punishment. Number 2, executions are on the increase. I guess we do that out here, so it's not the biggest deal in the world. No free speech, no protests, right? So you can't gather, demonstrate, whether it's peaceful or not, without the threat of being prosecuted. Women are widely discriminated against in this country. Women who supported a campaign against a ban on women drivers face the threat of arrest and other harassment and intimidation. Torture in police custody is common. You can be detained and arrested with no good reason. 8, religious discrimination is rife. 9, migrant workers have been deported en masse. 10, human rights organizations are banned. Now listen. Again, I'm going to have to stress this again. I don't care where it is that you line up on the side of things politically, or where it is that you line up with this entire issue. My only reason is to say that if you're ignorant to the issues in Saudi Arabia and you learned of these issues after the fact, where was this call to action then? Right? And even if the U.S. is just as bad, right? Let's just say I'm going to give you all the credit in the world in saying that the United States of America and the UK is just as bad as Saudi Arabia. What different? I mean, does 2 wrongs make a who cares now? Is that what we're doing? Like, what is the difference at that point? Why take such a hard stance in one direction and not the other if it's not that you're just taking a hard stance on the one that's safer to take a hard stance on? It's the issue that not a single media person worth his salt would press you on. The issue of race inequality in this country and on a wider scale, on the macro in this world. Police brutality. He finally has something to say. He limps into the crowd and pushes the envelope a little too far. He doesn't realize, because he claims he didn't read the paper. Anyone with a brain would agree the murder of George Floyd was unjustified. And there are too many instances of police brutality that happen all over the world. And that these instances affect people of color, specifically black people, at a higher rate. No one would disagree with that. But when you announce your call to action to purposely alter the economics in your own country, you would have to expect the person getting the short end of the stick and your new normal to be a little disgruntled, to say the least. Which leads us to the video in which he is reading from a piece of paper. A piece of paper he makes clear in the subsequent tweet he did not write. I actually believe AJ didn't read that paper before he didn't read the paper beforehand. I believe this, right? Because if you watch the tweet, I want you to pay close attention as he reads the words and ad-libs in his own so that he can show his agreeance. He's reading and ad-libbing. We can clearly tell at certain points he's going off script. Just watch for it.
Demonstrations, just like today, so well done, Watford. Inject the vaccine. We must not use a demonstration for selfish motives and turn it into rioting and looting. We need to be united in non-violent demonstrations. Show them where it hurts. Abstain from spending your money in their shops and in economies, and invest in black-owned businesses. And that's for all communities. If you want to uplift yourself, invest in your own businesses. We have to engage with the youth. I completely agree with that.
So again, he didn't write this speech, but let's reiterate. If you think I'm a racist, go fuck yourself. If you watch the full video, the speech was passed around and for someone to read, and I took the lead. I personally spoke from the heart about the Watford community, ideas of us personally investing 7 figures to create unity and opportunities and adding change to the African/Caribbean community. Shops aren't the issue here. Before you talk shit, you better boycott racism. I said what I said, and I will act to make change. Here are some of the subsequent responses to this particular tweet. Now, I would imagine that Anthony Joshua's Twitter feed prior to making this comment was somewhere around 50-50. As I go through the comments and I look like at every comment made past June 5th, they are close to 100% negative. And if I go back to May something, it's a 50-50. It's a coin flip as to whether you've got a Tyson Fury fan, a Wilder fan, or a straight up Joshua fan. It doesn't look like that anymore in the Twitter section. And I'd encourage you to check out yourself. Check that out for yourself. Now, me concluding this video, I'm glad that I was able to make it the entire way without mentioning the names of 2 other people. But sadly, I'm going to have to break this perfect game. I'm going to have to mention the names of Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. And the only reason why I'm doing this is to further illustrate my point. I don't even know that you agree with this. Put Tyson Fury in a situation, not in which he's speaking boxing, not in which he's speaking the politics of boxing, to where he's speaking specifically on the issues of gypsies in the UK. Put Deontay Wilder in a situation to where he's specifically speaking to the issues of black people in America in current times in the US. And tell me with a straight face that you think that either one of those guys would back off of that statement within hours or at all. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me today. You should be expecting some more content. I'm gonna do something fun with the wife. We're gonna watch the Top Rank card tonight and maybe post that, like the reaction to it. Subscribe, like, comment, all that great stuff. This is Dark Horse Boxing. Once again, I appreciate you hanging out with me, and I'll catch you on the flip.